Welcome back to Human Biology with Dr. B. Today we're talking about the endocrine system. So, endocrine system function. We've always heard about the endocrine system. It's all these things inside of us. That's what endo means. So, what does it do? Well, number one, it coordinates body systems and helps maintain homeostasis. As we all know from experience with me, homeostasis is one of my favorite words. It means staying the same. And within the body, maintaining homeostasis is incredibly important for the one sole goal of the fact that we need to maintain a stable internal environment. When our body does not maintain a stable internal environment, bad things happen. This works with the nervous system in a very similar way. The nervous system works similarly in that both seek to maintain homeostasis and respond to stimuli. The endocrine system responds to stimuli mostly within inside the body. The nervous system can both respond to stimuli from within the body as well as without the body. For example, you are listening to me right now. This is your nervous system working. The nervous system instantaneously responds. The endocrine system, however, can take a few minutes because it does travel through the circulatory system. The secretory cells release the hormones into the extracellular fluid where they diffuse into the bloodstream, and this is why the endocrine system can take so much longer to respond to stimuli than the nervous system. So what is a hormone? The endocrine system functions using hormones. So what the heck is this thing? Well, it's a chemical messenger, bottom line. That's all it is. It's a small molecule, and in some cases it can be a larger molecule, that allows communication within the body. We have two basic types, lipid-soluble and water-soluble. Lipid-soluble hormones, from our study of the cell membrane, we know that the cell membrane on every single cell in every single living thing, especially within our body, has a lipid bilayer, which means that the external portion is hydrophilic, it likes water. The inside of the membrane is hydrophobic, meaning it's afraid of water. So anything that is lipid soluble, remember, like dissolves like, can move directly through the membrane and have its effect in the nucleus. So a steroid is a lipid, it's formed from cholesterol. The most primary steroid hormones that you and I think of initially are the sex hormones, androgens and estrogens. They very easily move through the cell membrane. Then it finds a receptor, binds the receptor inside the cell. That receptor hormone complex then moves into the nucleus where it begins to affect translation and transcription. Remember, the central dogma of biology, we have DNA, which goes to RNA, which goes to protein. And once these genes are transcribed into RNA, they can then be made into protein, which is what has an effect all over the body, and in this case, specifically within the cell. The next type of hormone that we have is water soluble. Now, if it's water soluble, that means that this hormone cannot move through the hydrophobic core on its own, which then means that the receptor is established within the cell membrane. So the water-soluble hormone, epinephrine in this case, binds to the membrane receptor and then triggers a cascade of secondary messengers. Means that we start in one area, and then this produces an enzyme which acts on another substrate, which acts on another substrate, which acts on another substrate until we get to activation within the nucleus. So a hormone also affects a specific target cell. Now over here you can see that we have our endocrine glandular cell. This is the secreting cell. It makes the hormones, it makes everything. It secretes it directly into the bloodstream. And then, as we know from our study of the cardiovascular system, each capillary is only within 3 to 4 cells of every single cell in your body. So once the hormone is in the blood, it moves through blood to the cells. Now, these hormones are pushed external to the capillaries, just like all the other fluid, and if the target cell has a receptor, the hormone will bind and will have its effect within that cell. However, the target cells or the non-target cells that do not have a receptor, they are not affected by the hormone. The target cell has a very, very specific receptor. It's specific, It is only for that hormone, and it only allows effect and binding from that hormone. The third thing about an endocrine hormone is it travels in the blood. There are two different types of glands. We have exocrine glands and we have endocrine glands. Exocrine glands make their product and they are secreted through ducts. For example, the oil in the sebaceous glands within your hair follicle. Oils are secreted this way. Exocrine. Endocrine means that the capillaries move to and through the glandular tissue. The hormone diffuses from the secreting cell, the producing cell, directly into the bloodstream, and from there it goes to all the cells of the body. So, mechanisms of hormone actions. We have two basic mechanisms. We have one, negative feedback, and we've talked about negative feedback ad nauseum. This is the main way the body maintains homeostasis. So, as the blood level of this hormone increases, it triggers a negative feedback and says, there's enough, we can shut down this process at this moment. Feed forward, or positive feedback, basically is a snowball effect, the best example of which is labor and oxytocin, the release of oxytocin. So if you follow me around here, so first the baby, and this is why it takes 40 weeks typically to go into labor. A pregnancy is 40 weeks because the baby gets large enough so that the head pushes down on the cervix. Once the baby's head pushes on the cervix, this sends a signal to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus triggers the pituitary to release oxytocin. Oxytocin then feeds forward to the muscles of the uterus, causing a contraction, which means that the baby's head pushes further down on the cervix. And eventually, this watermelon baby is pushed out. This is much less common than negative feedback. Negative feedback is the primary way that homeostasis is maintained within the body. So how do these hormones interact? We have three different types of interactions. One is antagonistic. Anytime I hear the word antagonistic, I think of siblings. So me and my sister, we would sit down and we would like poke each other until my mom would turn around and start yelling at us. That's basically what antagonistic means. One hormone opposes that of another. Just like siblings, one opposes another. We have synergistic, where the two hormones work in concert to produce the end effect. And then third is permissive. One hormone allows or gives permission to the second hormone to either be released or to have its effect. Our major endocrine glands, as you can see, and we will walk through these one by one, we have the pineal gland, we have the thymus, the pancreas, the ovaries, the pituitary, the thyroid, adrenals, and testes. We also have accessory endocrine organs, which we'll talk about at the end. So the pineal gland. The pineal gland produces melatonin, and melatonin can affect reproductive development. It helps you maintain your circadian rhythm. A circadian rhythm is where we sleep at night and are awake during the day. And light, anytime we are exposed to light, it actually decreases the amount of melatonin in the body. The pineal gland will release melatonin in response to the light perceived through the eyes. And it promotes sleep, reduces jet lag, and may slow aging. Now, fun fact about melatonin, I want to focus here on reproductive development. So melatonin is touted as a great natural sleep aid, and I don't deny that. It really does help, it really does work, and it really does help you get back on a circadian rhythm, especially if you struggle with insomnia. Melatonin should not be taken daily for years because it can actually have negative effects on not only reproductive development in developing children and adolescents, but also negative reproductive effects in adults. And yes, that does mean it can have a negative effect on your sex life. FYI, don't abuse it. The thymus. The thymus is right here in the center of the chest, and in children is much larger. It actually is almost as large as a lung in children. The thymus secretes thymosin and thymopoietin, and the whole purpose of these hormones is to increase production and maturation of white blood cells. Now, this is one of the main reasons why we vaccinate small children. That, and also because they're tiny and these diseases can have a rampant effect in their body very, very quickly. But the thymus, because it is still large and has an increased production of thymosin and thymopoietin during childhood, it allows very quick and long-lasting immunity when encountering a vaccination. Now, that does not mean that adults do not have the same effect. It just means that in children, because the thymus is so much larger, and it does gradually shrink over time. So in adults, it's really not that big. The pancreas secretes insulin. The effects of insulin are number one, primarily to decrease the glucose in the blood. Now, what does this mean? That means that it moves to the second one, that it allows glucose to be transported from the blood into the tissues to allow the tissues to have the energy to move through cellular respiration. It inhibits the breakdown of glycogen to glucose because, hey, we don't need to break down glycogen at this moment, because if insulin is being secreted, that means there is glucose already in the blood. And it prevents the conversion of amino acids and fatty acids to glucose or any other type of usable energy. Again, it has everything to do with there is glucose, there is sugar in the blood, so we don't need to make any more. The pancreas also secretes glucagon. Now, the main thing that glucagon does is when your blood sugar drops, that 2 o'clock lull where you feel like you're going to pass out or you need a nap. Yeah, that's when glucagon is secreted by your pancreas, and it then will trigger your liver to release and break down some glycogen into glucose, so that way your body still has energy to be broken down for cellular respiration. It also prompts the liver to convert glycogen to glucose and glucose from lactic acid and amino acids. So after you've had a whole day of large exercise and you have a lot of lactic acid, the next day glucagon is helping your liver to reconvert that lactic acid back into glucose so that you can use it for energy. So the pancreas is one of the best examples of negative feedback. It is fantastic. It secretes both insulin and glucagon, which have, I don't want to say pretty much, they're not antagonistic. They work in concert to keep the blood sugar at a reasonable level within the body. So let's start here. So we eat something, which means that there is a higher than normal level of glucose in the blood. This triggers the pancreas to secrete insulin. The insulin stops the liver from breaking down glycogen and to putting more glucose into the bloodstream. This also allows adipose tissue to use glucose to form fat. And then our blood glucose returns to normal. Now, let's say our blood glucose level dips a little bit lower because it's 2.5 hours after a meal. What happens? This signals the blood glucose level drops, signals the pancreas to secrete glucagon. Glucagon then feeds back to the liver that says, hey, liver, I need some glycogen. I need some glucose. Can you please break down that glycogen so I can have a normal blood sugar level? This increases the blood sugar level and allows it to return to normal. The ovaries. Fun fact, ovaries are only found in women, not in men, just in case you were wondering. The main hormone that the ovaries produce is estrogen. It controls ovulation and also helps promote the establishment of secondary sexual characteristics in a woman, which means wider hips, breast development, more adipose tissue placed in areas on women. It's very different than in men. The second hormone the ovaries produce is progesterone, and progesterone is secreted in response to a fertilization event, and this helps prepare the uterine lining for the reception of an embryo. So that way that embryo can grow and become a fetus and then a baby. So the pituitary gland is up here in your brain, and it has two parts. We have the anterior and we have the posterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary produces growth hormone, prolactin, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. The posterior pituitary produces antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. Now, the anterior pituitary produces what we would call permissive hormones. Most of these hormones allow other hormones to be produced, or they trigger endocrine glands to actually release their hormones. We call them releasing hormones. Growth hormone is the only hormone that affects every single cell in your body, and aren't we glad? because growth hormone stimulates the rate of cell division as well as increase in cell size. And if we have some cells increase in size and not others, this can cause problems. It targets the bone, muscle, and cartilage primarily to allow for increase in stature. And some of the major disorders are gigantism. This can happen when growth hormone is overproduced in childhood and all the way through adolescence. They just skyrocket in size. Acromegaly is what happens when growth hormone is produced throughout adulthood. Typically, growth hormone isn't really produced during adulthood because we've reached our max stature typically by the age of 21. Actually cause enlarged facial bones, increased bone density size. You can see the difference between a normal adult and an acromegaly adult in that their nose and their skull continues to elongate and thicken, as well as larger ears. And pituitary dwarfism is where growth hormone just isn't produced, and so this isn't another form of dwarfism. These individuals just simply do not grow to be a normal adult stature. Prolactin in females stimulates the mammary glands to produce milk, and in males helps mature sperm in the testes. Now we have these tropic hormones. Tropic hormones allow for other hormones to be released, or for other things to be released by this endocrine tissue. The first one is thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the release of thyroid hormones in the thyroid, which we will talk about in a moment. Adrenocorticotropic hormone controls the synthesis and secretion of glucocorticoids in the adrenals. Follicle stimulating hormone in females promotes development of egg cells as well as secretion of estrogen, and in males promotes sperm production. Luteinizing hormone has both a male and female effect as well. In females, it causes ovulation as well as secretion of estrogen and progesterone, and in males, stimulates the secretion of testosterone and secretion of sperm, and production and secretion of sperm. Antidiuretic hormone. This causes the kidneys to absorb more water, which is incredibly important because the kidneys has all the blood in your body will eventually move through the kidneys. And what happens when, we'll talk more about this when we get to the urinary system, but when the blood is pushed through the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus, a lot of the fluid moves out into the tissue. This is purposeful, and the kidneys have this wonderful filtering effect. And when this happens, a lot of the water is resorbed. Antidiuretic hormone helps the kidneys to resorb all that water so that you don't die, basically, so you don't become dehydrated and lose all your water. When ADH is not in high enough quantities, it can cause diabetes insipidus, excessive urine production, and fun fact, this can be treated with a nasal spray. Huh. Also, fun fact, if you're an adult and over 21, you can have an adult beverage. And if you've ever had an adult beverage or two, you may have noticed that after a while you have to pee a lot. And that's because alcohol actually prevents antidiuretic hormone from binding within the nephron. We call it ADH blockage, which also is why if you have too many adult beverages, the next day you might feel slightly dehydrated. And that has everything to do with that alcohol in your adult beverages preventing antidiuretic hormone from binding and allowing resorption of water. Oxytocin in females stimulates uterine contractions, as we talked about previously, and in males can facilitate sexual behavior and transport of sperm. The thyroid is responsible for your metabolic rate, basically. Thyroxine is also known as T3 and T4. It regulates the metabolic rate and also helps your body produce heat. It helps maintain blood pressure and also helps a number of your organs to function normally. Hypothyroidism is very common in women over 30 and should be checked during any pregnancy, because hypothyroidism in pregnancy can lead to massive neurological problems within the fetus. The thyroid also produces calcitonin. Calcitonin stimulates the movement of calcium from the blood into the bone. It stimulates osteoblast activity. Osteoblasts lay down and deposit bone tissue and help the bones to grow and to maintain their strength. Calcitonin also inhibits breakdown of the bone. Calcitonin also increases the excretion of calcium in the urine. Then we have parathyroid. Parathyroid, the reason why it's not separate here is because parathyroid is only 4 little dots on the thyroid. And the thyroid is just a little bow tie right here up near your throat. Parathyroid produces parathyroid hormone. This stimulates osteoclast activity. Osteoclasts actually break down the bone and release calcium into the blood. This is very important for maintenance of a blood calcium level. Now, very similar to the way that the pancreas has a homeostatic and negative feedback effect, parathyroid and calcitonin have antagonistic effects. Calcitonin, blood calcium level is too high, will put the calcium back into the bones, and parathyroid hormone, if the blood calcium level is too low, will put the calcium back into the blood. The adrenals sit down here on top of the kidneys, and upon initial dissection, you would not know that this is glandular tissue. It literally just looks like a big blob of fat just sitting on top of the kidneys. But when you section it and look at it under a microscope, you can very clearly see that it has glandular activity. There's 2 major areas of the adrenals. We have the cortex and the medulla. Cortex always is the external region, medulla meaning inner. The adrenal cortex produces gonatocorticoids, glucocorticoids, and mineralocorticoids. The inner region produces epinephrine and norepinephrine. Mineralocorticoids, these help maintain a mineral homeostasis as well as water balance. Aldosterone, also produced by the adrenals, this affects the kidneys and increases resorption of sodium ions into the blood. This also promotes excretion of potassium. Glucocorticoids affect glucose homeostasis. They act on the liver to promote conversion of fat and protein into an energy that is usable by every single cell in the body, and that is glucose. This also inhibits the inflammatory response. And then we get to the medulla, where epinephrine and norepinephrine are produced. Now, both of these are related to a sympathetic nervous system response, which is triggered when short-term stress occurs. So, for example, if you're driving down the road and you see flashing red and blue lights in your rearview mirror, all of a sudden your heart starts beating and you feel like your stomach is dropping. That's adrenaline being put into your blood, as well as your sympathetic nervous system being triggered. The purpose of adrenaline and noradrenaline is to prepare your body for the fight or flight response. And then we move down, testes only in men. These produce testosterone, and the major effects of testosterone. Number 1, we're going to control sperm production with this hormone. And number 2, we are going to facilitate the production of secondary male sexual characteristics. For example, broader stature, larger muscles, thicker bones, etc. We have a number of accessory endocrine organs: the hypothalamus, pancreas, ovaries, testes, heart, placenta, stomach, the small intestine, kidneys. All of these can secrete endocrine hormones and can affect other organs with the secretion of those. And that brings us to the end of our endocrine system. Now you should be able to distinguish between an endocrine and exocrine gland, differentiate between negative and positive feedback, identify the major endocrine glands, and detail how each endocrine hormone works, its target cell, and how each of these helps maintain homeostasis. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time on Human Biology with Dr. B.